The lights dim. The air is thick with heat, sweat, and anticipation. Somewhere in the crowd, a heartbeat pounds in rhythm with the bass line pulsing through the speakers. You don't know it yet, but you're about to witness a collision of legends that will shake Jamaica to its core and echo through music history forever. This is the night Bob Marley met Michael Jackson. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss another untold story. It was March 8, 1975. Jamaica, a land already alive with rhythm, rebellion, and revolution. The island pulsed with reggae's heartbeat, its streets buzzing with the voice of the oppressed, its stages becoming temples of truth. On this night, Bob Marley and the Wailers were set to take the stage, prophets of a musical movement, warriors armed with guitars and faith. But before the fire of Marley's message ignited the crowd, something completely unexpected happened. The opening act walked on stage. Five brothers from Gary, Indiana. The Jackson Five. And at the center of them, just 16 years old, stood a boy who would one day become the most famous entertainer on earth, Michael Jackson. No one in Jamaica was ready for what was about to unfold. This wasn't just a concert, it was a cultural collision. A night when reggae met Motown, when Rastafari crossed paths with pop royalty, when two musical universes collided on one electrified stage. And somewhere in the wings, Bob Marley was watching, observing, absorbing, measuring this young prodigy with eyes that had seen revolution, poverty, exile, and hope. This is the story of when Bob Marley met Michael Jackson, and how that single night in Jamaica exploded into legend. In 1975, Michael Jackson was already a phenomenon. Though still technically part of the Jackson Five, his star was beginning to eclipse the group. His voice had matured, his stage presence sharpened, and his understanding of performance had evolved far beyond his years. He was no longer just the cute child star of I Want You Back or ABC. He was becoming something else, something dangerous, something unstoppable. But Jamaica was a different world. This was not the polished, choreographed, sequenced stage of American television. This was raw. This was real. This was reggae country, a land where music was not just entertainment but survival, where lyrics weren't about romance and rhythm alone but about struggle, liberation, identity, and God. And at the center of this world stood Bob Marley. Bob Marley was not just a musician. He was a movement, a spiritual leader, a revolutionary poet. His dreadlocks, his voice, his lyrics, they weren't fashion statements. They were weapons of truth. By 1975, Bob Marley and the Wailers had already begun their ascent to global icon status, carrying reggae beyond Jamaica's shores and into the hearts of millions. Yet on this night, Bob Marley was not the opener. The Jackson Five were. Picture it, a Jamaican crowd steeped in reggae culture waiting for their hero, the anticipation thick in the humid air. Then suddenly, Motown melodies, tight harmonies, smooth choreography, a sound foreign yet magnetic. The crowd didn't know what to expect. Some were skeptical, some curious, some impatient for Marley. But the moment Michael Jackson stepped forward, microphone in hand, something shifted. His voice cut through the night like lightning. Pure, powerful, impossible. 16 years old, and commanding the stage like a seasoned king. The crowd felt it before they understood it. This was not just an American boy band. This was something else, something extraordinary. Michael Jackson wasn't performing, he was inhabiting the music. Every note, every movement, every breath felt alive, urgent, necessary. And somewhere backstage, Bob Marley was watching. Not with jealousy, with curiosity, with respect, with recognition. Because Bob Marley understood something few people did. Greatness recognizes greatness. As Michael Jackson danced across the stage, the crowd's skepticism began to melt into amazement. They clapped, they cheered, they swayed, they surrendered. What began as polite applause transformed into roaring approval. The island that belonged to reggae was, for one night, opening its heart to a Motown prodigy. And Michael Jackson felt it. He felt the difference. This wasn't a polished American crowd. This wasn't a studio audience. This was Jamaica, raw, honest, unfiltered. They wouldn't cheer for you unless you earned it, and Michael Jackson was earning every single note. Later in life, Michael Jackson would often speak about moments that changed him, not in press conferences but in quiet reflections in interviews filled with reverence. This night in Jamaica became one of those moments, because this wasn't just another concert. This was a spiritual encounter, a collision of philosophies, a meeting of musical destinies. When the Jackson 5 finished their set, the crowd was on fire. And then Bob Marley stepped onto the stage. If Michael Jackson was lightning, Bob Marley was thunder. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The air seemed to thicken. The crowd roared not just with excitement but with devotion. This was their prophet, their voice, their brother. Bob Marley didn't just perform songs, he delivered sermons. Every lyric carried weight, every chord carried history. Songs like Get Up, Stand Up, No Woman, No Cry, and I Shot the Sheriff weren't just melodies, they were declarations. And Michael Jackson, now off stage, stood watching, absorbing, learning. Two icons, one stage, two worlds. Yet something even more extraordinary happened backstage. After the performances, away from the lights and noise, Bob Marley and Michael Jackson met. No cameras, no press, no public spectacle. Just two artists. One a global pop phenomenon in the making, the other a spiritual revolutionary already reshaping the world. What happened in that meeting has never been fully documented. No official transcripts, no recorded footage, only whispers, memories, stories passed through musicians, crew members, and those lucky enough to be nearby. But what is known is this. Bob Marley spoke to Michael Jackson not as a fan, not as a rival, not as a competitor, but as a brother in music. Bob Marley didn't talk about charts. He didn't talk about money. He talked about purpose. He talked about responsibility. He talked about using your voice not just to entertain, but to awaken. And Michael Jackson listened. You have to understand the moment. Michael Jackson was already surrounded by fame, money, managers, agents, producers, executives. Everyone wanted something from him. Everyone wanted to shape him. Everyone wanted a piece of his genius. But Bob Marley wanted nothing from him, except his soul. Not in a sinister way, but in a spiritual way. Bob Marley saw something in Michael Jackson that went beyond talent. He saw destiny. He saw influence, he saw power. And he understood that power without purpose is empty. Later, Michael Jackson would channel this lesson, not directly through reggae but through something deeper, through messages of unity, through songs like Man in the Mirror, Heal the World, Earth Song, and They Don't Care About Us. Songs that went beyond entertainment and stepped into advocacy. Was this entirely because of Bob Marley? No. But did that night plant a seed? Absolutely. Michael Jackson had grown up in a world where music was business, where performance was perfection, where image was everything. But Bob Marley introduced him, if only for a night, to music as mission, music as revolution, music as spiritual responsibility. And that changed him. Years later, people would notice something different about Michael Jackson's work, something deeper, something heavier. His songs weren't just catchy, they were urgent, emotional, global, human. That seed may have been planted in Jamaica. On March 8, 1975, on a stage where reggae met Motown, where Bob Marley met Michael Jackson. But the story doesn't end there. Because that night didn't just change Michael Jackson. It changed Jamaica. Imagine being in that crowd. Imagine being a young Jamaican fan, expecting reggae and only reggae, and suddenly witnessing one of the greatest performers in human history, before he even knew he would become that. Imagine feeling that energy. Imagine watching a 16-year-old boy command the stage with such power, such grace, such intensity that you realize you're not just watching a performer, you're watching history being born. That night, Jamaica saw something that America had already begun to see, but the world had not yet fully grasped. Michael Jackson was not just a star. He was a phenomenon. And Bob Marley recognized it. Bob Marley saw in Michael Jackson something familiar. A child thrust into fame. A voice burdened with expectation. A soul wrestling with destiny. Bob Marley had walked a hard road. Poverty, violence, political unrest, assassination attempts, exile, pain. Yet he had turned all of it into music that healed millions. Michael Jackson, too, was walking a difficult path. A child star raised under pressure. Fame before identity. Expectations before self-discovery. And though his world looked glamorous, his inner world was complex, fragile, intense. In Bob Marley, Michael Jackson saw a man who had turned suffering into purpose. And in Michael Jackson, Bob Marley saw a boy who could one day turn global fame into global change. That mutual recognition, that silent understanding, is what made their meeting legendary. No recordings, no photos, no press conference, just two souls recognizing each other across worlds. But what happened after that night is where the story becomes even more powerful. In the years following 1975, Michael Jackson's career exploded. He left the Jackson 5. He launched his solo career. He released Off the Wall, then Thriller, then Bad, then Dangerous, then H-High Story. And with each album his reach grew, not just musically but culturally, politically, emotionally. Michael Jackson wasn't just breaking records. He was breaking barriers. He wasn't just selling albums. He was changing minds. He wasn't just entertaining. He was awakening. And while he never became a reggae artist, he absorbed something far more important from that night with Bob Marley. He absorbed conviction. He absorbed courage. He absorbed the understanding that music could be a weapon against injustice. That melody could be a form of protest. That rhythm could be a call to action. Listen to Michael Jackson's later work, not with your ears but with your heart. Heal the world. Black or white. They don't care about us. Earth Song. These aren't pop songs. They're prayers. They're protests. They're pleas. They're Marley-like in spirit, even if not in sound. And that's the true legacy of that night. Not a collaboration. Not a recording, not a photograph, but a transmission, a passing of the torch, from one musical revolutionary to another. Bob Marley would pass away just 6 years later in 1981 at only 36 years old. The world mourned. Jamaica wept. Music lost one of its greatest prophets. But his spirit didn't die. It moved. It traveled. It lived on in the voices of those he inspired. And somewhere in that lineage stands Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson would later face his own struggles. Fame, controversy, pain, misunderstanding. The weight of being the most famous human being on the planet. The loneliness, the isolation, the relentless scrutiny. But through it all, he kept creating. He kept reaching. He kept trying to heal the world. Just like Bob Marley had. Now imagine an alternate universe. Imagine if Bob Marley and Michael Jackson had recorded a song together. Reggae meets pop. Rastafari meets Motown. Prophet meets Prodigy. It would have shaken the world. But perhaps what they shared was too sacred for a studio. Perhaps that moment belonged only to them. Two legends. One night. One island. one collision of destiny. And that's what makes the story so powerful. Not what we saw, but what we didn't. Because some moments aren't meant to be documented. They're meant to be felt. They're meant to be remembered. They're meant to echo quietly through time, shaping the world in ways we may never fully understand. And yet here we are, decades later, still talking about it, still wondering, still feeling the energy of that night, still inspired by what happens when greatness meets greatness. This story isn't just about Bob Marley. It isn't just about Michael Jackson. It's about what happens when art transcends genre, race, nationality, and ego. It's about what happens when music becomes a bridge between worlds. It's about what happens when a 16-year-old boy steps onto a stage in Jamaica and unknowingly steps into history. It's about what happens when a reggae prophet sees a pop prodigy and recognizes a future leader of hearts. And it's about what happens when two legends meet, not to compete, but to connect. That night in Jamaica didn't explode because of fireworks. It exploded because of spirit, because of energy, because of destiny, because Bob Marley met Michael Jackson. And the world was never the same. So the next time you listen to a Michael Jackson song, really listen. Listen not just to the beat. Listen not just to the melody. Listen to the message. Listen to the urgency. Listen to the compassion. Listen to the cry for unity. Because somewhere in that sound, somewhere in that soul, you might hear an echo of a Jamaican night in 1975, where reggae and pop collided, where a prophet met a prodigy, and where music history was quietly rewritten. And that weight had first been introduced to him, not by fame, not by money, not by industry, but by a reggae prophet in Jamaica who showed him that music could be a form of resistance. Michael Jackson didn't become Bob Marley, but he became something that could only exist in a world where Bob Marley had lived. A global voice, a bridge between cultures, a messenger wrapped in melody. Yet for all his success, Michael Jackson's life was far from peaceful. Fame did not shield him from pain. In many ways, it amplified it. His childhood had been shaped by discipline, pressure, and performance. He had learned to dance before he learned to rest. He had learned to smile before he learned to speak. He had learned to perform before he learned to be. And that pattern followed him into adulthood. The world saw a superstar, but inside there was a child still searching for safety, still searching for understanding, still searching for home. Bob Marley had once said, "My life is only important if me can help plenty people." Michael Jackson seemed to live by a similar creed. He gave. He donated. He visited hospitals. He supported charities. He built amusement parks. He tried to create a world where children could laugh, play, and feel safe. But he could not escape the contradictions of his own existence. He was the most famous human being on Earth, and one of the most misunderstood. The same media that celebrated him would later turn against him. The same public that adored him would later doubt him. The same industry that profited from him would later abandon him. And yet through it all, he kept creating. He kept singing. He kept dancing. He kept trying to heal the world, just like Bob Marley had. In 1991, when Michael Jackson released Dangerous, the album signaled another evolution. The music was sharper, more intense, more experimental. The themes were heavier, the sound more global. Songs like Black or White addressed racism and unity directly. Heal the World became an anthem for compassion. Jam was an explosion of energy and urgency. Who Is It explored betrayal and heartbreak with haunting depth. This was no longer the Michael Jackson of Thriller. This was a man wrestling with reality. a man grappling with power, fame, love, loss, and injustice. And again, the echoes of that Jamaican night lingered, because Bob Marley had shown him that music could confront the world, that it didn't have to hide behind metaphor, that it could speak truth to power. Michael Jackson took that lesson and amplified it to a global scale. Where Bob Marley had spoken to the oppressed of Jamaica, Michael Jackson spoke to the oppressed of the world. Where Bob Marley had sung about revolution, Michael Jackson sang about unity. Where Bob Marley had called for liberation, Michael Jackson called for healing. Different languages, same spirit. And yet, despite his global influence, Michael Jackson remained deeply lonely. Fame built walls around him. Security isolated him. Suspicion surrounded him. He lived in a world where few people could truly reach him, where few people could truly know him, where few people could truly love him without wanting something in return. Bob Marley had once said, "The biggest coward of a man is to awaken the love of a woman without the intention of loving her." Michael Jackson lived in a world where love was always complicated, where affection was always questioned, where intentions were always scrutinized. And so he retreated further into himself, into his music, into his art, into his imagination. And in that retreat, his music grew even more introspective. A Chai Story, released in 1995, was perhaps his most revealing album. Not just musically, but emotionally. It was a declaration, a defense, a confession, a battle cry. Songs like Scream, Stranger in Moscow, They Don't Care About Us, and Smile revealed a man under siege. He wasn't just singing anymore. He was fighting. Fighting for his reputation. Fighting for his truth. Fighting for his sanity. Fighting for his soul. And in those moments, he wasn't just Michael Jackson the pop star. He was Michael Jackson the human being. Wounded. Angry. Heartbroken. Hopeful. Still believing despite everything that love could prevail. Still believing despite everything that the world could be healed. Still believing despite everything that music could save us. And again, the spirit of Bob Marley hovered. Because Bob Marley, too, had been misunderstood. He, too, had been attacked. He, too, had been politicized. He, too, had been threatened. He, too, had been wounded. Yet he had never stopped singing. Never stopped believing. Never stopped fighting. Michael Jackson walked a different road, but the destination was the same. Freedom. Healing. Unity. Truth. The night Bob Marley met Michael Jackson did not create a collaboration, but it created a lineage. A lineage of artists who understood that music was not just sound. It was responsibility. It was revolution. It was redemption. But as the years passed, Michael Jackson's struggles intensified. The weight of fame, the pressure of expectations, the loneliness of isolation, the pain of betrayal, the exhaustion of defending himself. All of it took its toll. He became increasingly reclusive, more guarded, more withdrawn. Yet even in his darkest moments, he continued to create. He continued to dream. He continued to believe. He continued to hope. And in those hopes, he carried the torch that Bob Marley had once lit. In 2001, when Michael Jackson released Invincible, the album reflected both strength and vulnerability. Songs like You Rock My World showed his timeless charm, while others like Privacy and Threatened revealed his anger and frustration with media intrusion and public scrutiny. This was no longer the carefree boy dancing on stage. This was a man who had seen the darkest sides of fame. And yet he still believed in love. still believed in healing, still believed in music, still believed in humanity. The world, however, seemed increasingly divided. Wars, terrorism, racism, poverty, environmental destruction, corruption. The world was breaking, and Michael Jackson felt it. He felt it deeply. He felt it personally. He felt it spiritually. He once said, "If you enter this world knowing you are loved and you leave this world knowing the same, then everything that happens in between can be dealt with." But for Michael Jackson, love was always complicated. The love of fans, the love of the public, the love of the world. It was vast. It was overwhelming. But it was also conditional, fragile, unstable. And that contradiction haunted him. Bob Marley had once sung, "Love the life you live the life you love." Michael Jackson tried. But living the life he loved was not easy when the world demanded something else. Yet through it all, his music remained a sanctuary, a refuge, a confession, a prayer, a bridge between his inner world and the outer chaos. And that bridge had been strengthened, long ago, on a Jamaican stage where reggae and pop collided. Because that night taught him something no fame ever could. That music could be a form of service. That art could be an act of love. That performance could be a form of prayer. As the years went on, Michael Jackson's physical health declined. Pain, fatigue, exhaustion, insomnia. The toll of decades of performance, stress, and emotional strain became impossible to ignore. He was tired, not just physically, but spiritually. He had given the world everything. And yet he felt misunderstood, undervalued, unprotected. And still he wanted to give more. In 2009, when Michael Jackson announced his comeback tour, "This is it," the world erupted. Fans rejoiced. Tickets sold out instantly. The king of pop was returning. He was going back to the stage, back to the lights, back to the music, back to the world. It was supposed to be a celebration, a reunion, a rebirth. But behind the scenes, Michael Jackson was struggling. Physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. He was exhausted. Yet he kept rehearsing, kept pushing, kept striving, because he wanted to give the world one more gift, one more performance, one more moment, one more chance to heal. And then on June 25, 2009, the world stopped. Michael Jackson was gone. The boy who had danced across a Jamaican stage in 1975. The young prodigy Bob Marley had watched with curious respect. The man who had become the most famous entertainer in history. The artist who had tried to heal the world. Gone. The world erupted in grief. Fans cried. Artists mourned. Cities gathered. Candles were lit. Songs were played. Memories were shared. And in that collective mourning, something became clear. Michael Jackson had not just been a pop star. He had been a part of people's lives. A soundtrack to their childhoods. A voice in their hardest moments. A light in their darkest days. And that is the mark of a true artist. Not how many records they sell, but how many hearts they touch. Bob Marley had once said, "When music hits you, you feel no pain." Michael Jackson's music had hit billions. And in that moment of loss, the world felt both pain and gratitude. Pain for what was lost, gratitude for what had been given. And as fans revisited his music, his videos, his performances, they began to see something more clearly. Michael Jackson had not just entertained. He had tried to save the world, in his own way, with his own voice, with his own language. And that mission had begun, quietly, long before Thriller, long before Bad, long before Dangerous. It had begun on a Jamaican stage, when a reggae prophet and a pop prodigy met. Bob Marley had once said, "The greatness of a man is not in how much wealth he acquires, but in his integrity and his ability to affect those around him positively." By that measure, Michael Jackson was immense. Not because of his wealth, not because of his fame, but because of his impact. He affected billions, across cultures, across generations, across borders, across beliefs. He changed how people danced, how people sang, how people dressed, how people thought, how people felt. He made people feel seen. He made people feel heard. He made people feel connected. And that is the true power of music. Not charts, not awards, not accolades, but connection, healing, unity. Bob Marley had devoted his life to that mission. Michael Jackson, in his own way, continued it. Different paths, same destination. And so, the night Bob Marley met Michael Jackson stands not just as a historical curiosity, but as a spiritual intersection. A moment when two worlds collided. A moment when two philosophies met. A moment when two legacies intertwined. Even if they never recorded a song together. Even if they never stood on stage together. Even if their meeting was brief. Its impact was eternal. Because sometimes, the most powerful collaborations happen not in studios, but in silence. Not in public, but in private. Not in sound, but in spirit. And that is what happened in Jamaica in 1975. A spirit was passed. A torch was lit. A mission was shared. And the world would feel its effects for decades. Today, when we speak of Bob Marley, we speak of freedom. We speak of rebellion. We speak of peace. We speak of love. We speak of revolution. When we speak of Michael Jackson, we speak of innovation. We speak of excellence. We speak of emotion. We speak of unity. We speak of healing. And though their music sounded different, their hearts beat for the same cause. A world where people could live without fear. A world where people could love without hatred. A world where people could be free without chains. A world where music could be more than sound. It could be salvation. So the next time you hear One Love or Heal the World, listen closely. Because those songs are not just melodies. They are prayers. They are promises. They are echoes of a night when two legends met and the world changed forever. The night Jamaica exploded. Not with violence, not with chaos, but with possibility, with purpose, with destiny. When Bob Marley met Michael Jackson, the future of music didn't just shift. It awakened. And it continues to awaken every time someone presses play. Every time someone dances. Every time someone cries. Every time someone believes. Every time someone hopes. Every time someone heals. And that is the true legacy of that night. Not a concert. Not a headline. Not a rumor. But a reminder that music is more than entertainment. It is a force. It is a movement. It is a miracle. And sometimes all it takes is one night, one stage, one meeting, one moment to change the world forever. If this story moved you, opened your heart, or helped you see Michael Jackson and Bob Marley in a new light, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps these untold stories alive and ensures that the legends who shaped our world are never forgotten.